So, Andrea, have you come up with a New Year's resolution?
Yes, I'm going to use the gym. The membership comes with my apartment. And it's very far. It's about 20 steps to the elevator. I'm going to use it. I really am. It was my last year's resolution, too.
This health
went
club
up
is
there.
in your building?
It's upstairs, yes. It is literally, I think, above my apartment with a beautiful view of the city.
So your resolution is to get in the elevator.
To get in the elevator and go upstairs. Instead of lying on the lounge chair and reading my book, I will sit on the bicycle or the, what's that thing called? Treadmill.
What's that thing?
That thing where you walk. I'm supposed to do that.
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. It's great to see you two.
Hello.
In the new year, I should add.
Woohoo.
So on the show this week, 5 New Year's resolutions you can make and not break.
And
So
try
this is-
hard.
Try hard. This is kind of a trick title because what we're actually going to talk about today is people getting on a journey toward better health. Not about their image, not about their swimsuit bod, not about hacks, just about a lifestyle and a mindset that will lead to better health. And that's what this podcast is all about. So you guys ready to jump in?
Sure.
Jump away.
Okay. Number 1, if you suspect you have metabolic syndrome, take action in 2025. I think all of us on the call, well, Andrea and I, came to the realization, thanks to Dr. Cooper, that we do have metabolic syndrome. And because of that, we started getting treatment about, 12 years ago and are now in amazing health. So Dr. Cooper, I think it would be good to just define metabolic syndrome. I know a lot of people listening might be thinking, do I have it? Do I not have it? Where do they start in that assessment?
Well, metabolic syndrome is a specific category of metabolic dysfunction. So it's a subcategory. So if you think of metabolic dysfunction as very broad, and it could include so many things that are disturbances in the metabolic pathway that lead to problems with health and abnormal weight, abnormal appetite in some cases. But metabolic syndrome is a specific collection of things within that category, within that big overarching metabolic dysfunction category. And the reason we separate it out is because it carries a greater risk of disease formation, such as heart disease, diabetes, risk of strokes, risk of fatty liver disease. And so we like to categorize people as having metabolic syndrome or not having metabolic syndrome. And to meet the criteria for metabolic syndrome, you have to have 3 of several different metabolic derangements, we call them, which would be abnormalities in your glucose levels or your insulin. So it could be normal glucose, but insulin resistance, or it could be prediabetes, or it could be diabetes. That would be one category. Another would be within your cholesterol panel if you have elevations of triglyceride levels, or if you have a low level of the, quote, good cholesterol, which is the HDL cholesterol. Those are also another criteria. And another one would be elevated blood pressure, so hypertension. And then it could also include fatty liver disease So those are just examples. And if you have any three, you qualify as this metabolic syndrome. Another one that's in the category is an increase in waist circumference. But I feel like so many people have that. It just isn't really, I don't use that as one of the criteria, because if you're just a larger person, you're going to meet that waist circumference criteria. So I don't feel that that has as much value. But if you're a person that has had this testing done and you realize, wait, I've got hypertension, my blood pressure's been elevated, I have cholesterol and triglyceride problems, and I've got prediabetes, well, right there, that's metabolic syndrome. And so it's just a convenient kind of label for healthcare professionals so that they can identify the people that are at risk for those disease progressions like diabetes, heart disease, and stroke risk.
Okay, not everybody can come and see you or talk to you. So how do you go get tested? How do you go figure this all out?
Well, this is an area that really is not rocket science. It really is not. It's very straightforward. And in fact, this information has been around since the 1990s. When I was in my residency training program is when they first started talking about metabolic syndrome. And it's recognized throughout the world. The World Health Organization recognizes it. So every major medical group throughout the world recognizes metabolic syndrome. So I think it's one of those things where if you familiarize yourself with these components, the hope is that most providers would pick this up on just pretty routine testing, because they're going to check your blood pressure. They'll check your cholesterol levels. And even if they don't really look at a very detailed cholesterol panel, which we call the lipoprotein analysis, but if they don't even look at that and just look at the basic surface numbers, and they do a blood pressure and a blood glucose level, HbA1c, probably they'd pick it up. And something called a metabolic panel, which would include the fatty liver markers, although keep in mind that people can have fatty liver disease without having abnormal blood liver enzyme levels. But I think that the clues are all there usually for just some basic routine workup. The one test that I see is left off an awful lot is insulin. And I think that would be a good thing to push for, is something like a fasting insulin level. And there are several equations that take the glucose and the insulin to determine whether it's normal or it's not normal. But you could ask your provider, could you include an insulin with that? I want to make sure I don't have metabolic syndrome. If you say those words, metabolic syndrome, they may kind of, really put that context into place. But I have seen patients labeled as having metabolic syndrome that don't. So I've seen a lot of medical bias where maybe healthcare professionals see a person that's a larger size and they tell them, well, you have metabolic syndrome, without any tests. And it's very biased. It's not true necessarily. There are plenty of people who have a high body weight but don't have metabolic syndrome. And at the same time, there's plenty of people who have a normal body weight and do have metabolic syndrome. So that's one reason I never use that waist circumference criteria. It's just misleading. So I think if someone's telling you have metabolic syndrome, but they haven't run any of these tests, I'd be a little bit suspicious.
Yeah. Dr. Cooper, over the decades, you've seen thousands and thousands of patients. Talk about some of the common denominators, for people like Andrea and me when we came to see you. Family history, a history of dieting. Talk about some of those common denominators for people listening who might be, fitting that person.
Yeah, I think that definitely the two of you are very good examples of two different kinds of presentations you would get with metabolic syndrome. And it's true, you both had the metabolic syndrome criteria, but Andrea had kind of an obvious high body weight state. You, Mark, had, it's not just because you're male and some of that slides, but you had an elevated weight, but it was just like not that abnormal,
Yeah, being 6'2", you can hide a lot of it.
Yeah, well, and you never know. It's true, being male and 6'2", you never know, because body composition plays a big role, like how much of it's muscle mass, body fat, But the two of you kind of highlight those two different presentations that you see, because a normal weight person or close to normal that has metabolic syndrome is known to be a little bit harder to treat, actually. And the metabolic syndrome is more tenacious in that group. It's more persistent and more resistant to treatment. Whereas people with the high body weight that have metabolic syndrome, usually, and this is a lot in my clinical experience, but I've also read this in research papers that have noted this, but usually the metabolic syndrome is more reversible and less dependent long-term on the medication cocktails and things like that. So it's just interesting, those two differences. But I think genetics in both cases plays a huge role. Genetics is responsible, the old adage is genetics is responsible for about 75% of, quote, obesity and diabetes. But I think it's going to be more than that, the genetics, because there's this genetic vulnerability. And what we're learning, especially like experts in genetics are learning this, and experts in environmental genetics, it's just fascinating the fact that we can have certain underlying genetic predispositions and vulnerabilities. Then when we're exposed to certain things, those actually can change our gene expression. And some of these things are chemicals in our environment and toxins in our environment that we're all exposed to. So if you don't have the underlying genetic vulnerability, you may not be as impacted and it may not lead to metabolic syndrome. But what if you do? And then you're exposed to some of these common chemicals in our environment, that could be a pretty strong force to kind of ignite this metabolic syndrome. And so I think that definitely family history is important, but we also know that other things in our lifestyle do contribute, like sleep problems. So if you have someone who has a history of sleep apnea or just really poor sleep and has the genetics, stress plays a role. Our stress levels can also increase our susceptibility because the stress can increase our ghrelin levels, and ghrelin can interfere with metabolic processes and contribute to cortisol elevations, all kinds of stuff. I think that there's the social history. What is the person's current level of stress? What's their occupational, maybe exposures to chemicals or just occupational stress levels, their family stress levels? What's their childhood exposures? Were they a child that was born small for their gestational age? So that's also a risk factor. Was their mother, did she have gestational diabetes? That's another risk factor. So there's so many of these things you have to ask in the history of a person to find out where their risk really comes from and whether they really are in a risk group.
And the chronic dieting and the dieting.
Yeah, so true.
Yes.
We're going to get to sleep in just a second here because that is one of the resolutions. All right, number 2 on our resolution list. Stop trying to get a beach body and start focusing on our health. Andrea, with your background in marketing.
Well, I felt I was going to be a beach model. No, I don't think I ever thought I would be a beach model, but I definitely thought I could be. I don't know. Did I think I could be taller? Maybe I don't know, something. I definitely did not think I could be who I was supposed to be.
Yeah. And the message
I wanted
is
to be
from
somebody else.
Message is from media, right?
It's from everything. It's from everything. It's not just media. It's from your grandmother and your mother and your friends. And, it's literally from everything. I don't think we can just blame the media. I think that's unfair. I think it's from, years of history of every which way but loose, clothes. I don't think you can get away from saying clothes look better on a thinner, taller body. And it's not just thinner, it's taller too, I gotta say. So it's like, oh, such a pretty face, but... And then you wonder about that too. And then you're like, it's just like you're hit from every single thing. So you end up not believing in yourself in so many different ways. And you think, well, this is something I could maybe control. So you try and control it. But, you can't really, or you can for just a short while. And it's not sustainable. And it took, how many years? 45 years to figure that one out. And now I think a lot of it comes from just believe in what you can be, just like go with it. And some of that I think is age that you eventually say, you know what, I'm going with this one. I'm going to go with be the better Andrea. I am not going to be Cindy Crawford. That is not happening. And I'm going to go with this one.
Yeah.
So I think that's all part of it too. It's like, it's not just physical, it's mental. I think once you can accept that part of it, and I know this sounds crazy and I know we've said it before, but part of the fantastic thing of the fantastic science of the drugs that we take is that it kind of lets you accept that and believe that, oh, this can happen. This can be a good thing. And you go with it. And it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling that it's not your fault that this happened. This is you. You can be you, and you can be your best you. And I tell people that, like when they're starting to say, oh, should I take these drugs? Should I do it? And you know what? Focus on you. Focus on what you can do best and how the best you. And I think that learning that part of it is like, that can bring you joy. It can really, like, it lets go of this, like, not to make a metaphor, but it lets go of this weight that's been holding you down. And, like, you can be, like, such a good you. I don't know. It really works.
And Dr. Cooper, we've heard you say, don't chase the last 10 pounds because that mindset could really backfire. When we talk about this resolution, not trying to get the beach body, but just focusing on health, what's the proper mindset that you recommend?
Well, this topic, it just makes me cringe, to be honest. It does make me uncomfortable because if you listen to what Andrea said, we're talking about society and culture's imposed concept of what a, quote, beach body is supposed to be, and that's not true in every country either. Our culture and our society is saying this, and so many are saying that. But think about what that has done to our population that is trying to achieve this unattainable body image and being pressured into thinking that they should be able to attain that. So it's not even just people that might have genetic high body weight. It's people of every weight.
It's everybody.
It's people of every body size.
Right. It's perfection. It's really all about perfection.
But it's perfection defined by a society and culture that
right.
is just saying that arbitrarily where there's no evidence that is anything better than anything else. So anyway, I just think that when we think about this, what is the cause of obesity accelerating in our community throughout the country? What is it? Isn't it largely because of this? Isn't it largely because of creating these false, sense of what is, quote, normal or acceptable or ideal? It's not true. Those are not attainable. Those are airbrushed things that aren't even necessarily, it's some concept, a society concept, but it's not necessarily anything valid. But people chasing those things at any body size are setting themselves up for an actual real metabolic problem. And so then we're taking people that might have that genetic vulnerability where it's getting triggered by all of this. And so it could be the root cause for a lot of people of their situation where they have now found themselves in a situation where they're not taking in very much fuel. They're trying to exercise the, quote, pounds off, and their weight is just increasing out of control, and they're feeling crazy. And why is it happening? Because it starts from, in any person's body size, anyone who is chasing that craziness. And so I think here it's more like, yes, our culture does this and it's advertised everywhere and we kind of normalize it and act like, oh, the beach body, But think about it. It really is very cringeworthy. So my feeling is just like, how can we as a culture get away from that and not really, and get our kids away from it too, and change the value system in our communities to try to clean them up from that dysfunction. And it's very hard because It's in all the media. And when Andrea was saying, like, what's the perfect body type for the clothes to hang? Well, maybe there's something wrong with the clothing industry, not the bodies. I mean, so how do we get this to change in all these different layers and all the different advertising? And how do we hold people responsible in the media and in all these different areas? And so that's an area that I'm really focused on a lot, but I just don't know what I can do personally or what we can do as a community to get these things to change. But I think it's super important, if not for our own generations, but for our children.
Well, I think you're always going to have a beauty, like there's always going to be a beauty culture where there are always going to be people who are just magnificently, amazingly beautiful models. There are always going to be those people. There always are. And you're always going to look at them and go, oh my God, that person is beautiful. But I think that in terms of personal, regular, normal people, there's going to be that. And I think you can teach people that that's beautiful too. And it's not necessarily something that's less. That, I think, to me, is the difference.
Yeah.
You don't have to be less. That's just different.
Every time I go to Costco, I spend most of my life outside of work at Costco. But I love people watching, and go to Costco. Next time you're out shopping, like at Costco or something, I think there's beauty in diversity. I think there's beauty in how amazingly different we all are. No two people at Costco look alike unless they're from the same family.
Right.
But I just love that idea, Andrea, that beauty isn't comparing ourselves to somebody else. It's about celebrating just who we are.
Yeah. I'm at
And being
Target
okay
all the
with
time, so
Same thing.
same thing.
Okay, we got to keep going on our resolutions. So number 2 is stop trying to get the beach body, start focusing on health. And when we say health, we mean overall health. Number 3, commit in 2025 to not dieting. Here's a resolution that we want you to absolutely embrace. So, Dr. Cooper, we've talked about the scarcity mindset and why reducing calories always backfires. So take it from there.
I love this one because people will test you and see, are you really serious about this? And yes, we're serious about it because it's not beneficial metabolically to be cutting out food groups and restricting your calories and depriving yourself, because not only would it not work long term, because the metabolic adaptation, the physiology is so powerful that it catches on very quickly to that and just will slow your metabolism down. And it may be trying to jack up your appetite to try to get you to eat more while it's slowing your metabolism down. So you'll end up in a worse place. But it's also not healthy. And people do it in the name of health often. Like, I'm on this health kick and I'm cutting out carbs, or I'm on this health kick and I've cut down my calories and I'm exercising. But when you think about it, is that healthy? We need to fuel our efforts, our physical body and our mental, cognitive activity and all of that. We're not saying to live on junk food. Obviously, we're thinking about health in a different setting. Health and nutrition do go hand in hand. Nutrition is always important for our health, for everyone's health. It always is. And as we've talked about a lot, the chemical additives in our food supply and in our food packaging, there's a concern because it can cause things like the endocrine disruption that can lead to increased disease risk, cancer, heart attacks, strokes, diabetes. So of course we want to be conscious of our food and try to eat as healthily as we can while it's convenient so that we're not creating a plan that's just, again, not attainable, something that we realistically can follow in our nutrition patterns. But what we don't want to do is say, we're going to achieve weight loss by cutting back our calories by X amount, or cutting out carbs, or fasting for all this long period, or exercising without fueling. Because once you're doing that, and it's falling into this intentional weight loss efforts, that is what your body catches on to, and that is what really injures your metabolic system. And people will tell you that's not true. People will say, oh, that just doesn't happen. But there's so many research studies that have demonstrated this and proven that this is the case, that these markers of our metabolic health do end up favoring weight regain and disrupted appetite regulation and health disruption, including fatty liver and this weight cycling that can lead to heart risk, cardiovascular risk. Those research studies prove that those things do happen following these deprivation diets. Now, it doesn't happen right away. So it's one of those things where while you're doing this plan, it feels like it's working because maybe you're seeing the scale go down, but then it stops doing that and it starts to creep back up, even though you feel like you're doing the same thing. So then you start cranking it more and then you see it's going up more. So then you try to eat more thinking maybe my metabolism doesn't like this. And then it just starts, out of control. So I think most people who have been on this path know this is true because personally they've experienced it. And we usually don't have to convince people about this because they say, oh yeah, that happened to me. That makes total sense. That must be what's happening. And we even have patients who have said, I suspect this is happening to me now because of my history of this dieting. So what you don't want to do is trap yourself, I call it into a food prison, because then you definitely need medical help to get out of it. Yeah. Whereas maybe if you had never done that in the first place, things would level out for your system a lot better. So the diets, I would definitely, the diets and the diet mentality. And a lot of people think they're not even on a diet when they are on a diet. Mm-hmm. So you have to really think, I hear people say, I'm not on a diet at all. I'm eating whatever I want. And then there's no starches in their diet.
Right. They just eat salad.
Yeah. And so
I think it's all about balance. I think that's one thing that Mark and I sort of have taken away from it, away from all the things that you've talked about for years, not just what we eat, but that we should exercise properly and not restrict any one category of what we eat. And we should also look at the labels and of what we're eating and how it's packaged and how we look at food and how we look at sort of everything that we do in general. Like, it's all about balance.
That's right. And you know what? That's the same advice you give any patient of any size, almost any condition, any health condition.
Yeah.
Because if we're aiming for good health, that's kind of what we need to do.
And to try and eat things as close to the way that they were grown or invented.
Yeah. Like, I want to see the Pop-Tart tree where those
where's
things
that?
come from.
Where's that Pop-Tart tree?
So the idea is that if we're not dieting, what are we doing? Well, food's not the enemy, as Andrea has said in the past.
Yes.
Eat within 30 minutes of getting up, balanced meals throughout the day, carbs, fats, protein, fuel your exercise, late night snacks are okay. We need food. We need a variety of food.
Food's not the enemy.
Food is not the enemy. All right, we've got to get to 2 more resolutions before the end of the show.
Uh-oh.
Andrea, do you want to take number 4?
Get enough sleep. Sleep is good. Sleep is it's not all about I only get 2 hours of sleep and I'm fine. Because that is not true. You really need sleep. I learned that a whole lot of things happen at 2 in the morning. What time is it happen at? 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning? Things happen that you don't even know. Really good things happen, right?
That's right. From midnight to 4 a.m., a lot of metabolic hormones do balancing acts. And so early into the night, the ghrelin reaches a peak level. And then
that's the hunger hormone.
That's the hunger hormone.
Yep.
And then following that, our leptin starts to come up. And so those are 2 opposing signals. The ghrelin saying we're hungry, the leptin saying we weigh enough. If the sleep's disrupted, there's not that balance between those 2. And the ghrelin tends to go higher and the leptin goes lower. So then you end up favoring the next day a slower metabolic rate throughout the day when you wake up.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are studies that show that people who have to work during the middle of the night actually don't live as long as other people. So there's a very direct correlation between quality of sleep and quality of life. How much sleep should we get, Dr. Cooper?
Well, it's pretty variable. Apparently it's, we like to say everyone should get 8 hours, but when you read about it, again, I'm not an expert on sleep. I'll just say that. But from what I have read, 7 to 9 hours is like the window where there's variability individually. But I know for metabolic hormones, when they've done some testing, they've shown that 7.5 hours below that much, the metabolic hormones start to suffer. We recommend 7.5 to 8 hours to our patients if they can get that. But also the timing of when you fall asleep. I always am trying to get people to fall asleep before midnight because of that cycle that occurs. And there have been some studies showing that that seems to be more favorable metabolically. But there is a lot of variation in sleep needs. And as we age, we don't need necessarily as much sleep, and children need a lot more sleep than adults do.
All right, number 5, the last resolution on our list, be good to yourself. And this might sound kind of kumbaya, but loving ourselves, I really think just might be the most important thing we can do in 2025. And Andrea, I'd love to hear some thoughts from you. You've been on this journey your entire life and struggle, and there's been shame and there's been pressure from your family to lose weight. And I'd just love to hear some thoughts from you, because I feel like we know each other well enough that I feel like you are in such a good headspace now in terms of just loving yourself. And it's been a journey, hasn't it?
Well, I don't like to call it a journey, but I guess it really is a journey, because a journey to me sounds like there's a backpack involved, and I'm not really into backpacks. But I think that it's definitely been, a long thing. And now I'm just like, I, in terms of eating and stuff, I do what I want and what my body says I need. Like, if I need a snack, I have a snack. And it's like, if you don't think I should have a snack, well, too bad for you. And I always have dessert, and friends of mine who are still in that diet head are like, oh yeah, she always needs a dessert. And they always have some of my dessert, I might say. And because to me, like, having a dessert is like it's sort of like the period at the end of a sentence. It's like that makes a meal. And for so many years, I deprived myself of anything good at the end of a meal, or I'd have, fruit cocktail. And now I'm like, you know what? I want a little bit of flan or a little bit of creme brulee, and that's what I have. And do I finish the whole thing? Not usually, but you know what? I want it. And it's sort of, in a way, it's not just like, oh, she has a sugar craving. It's not about that. It's really about, that's just the way a meal should be. And it's a mental thing, I think. And it makes it so that it's a beautiful thing. It's sort of a celebration of food. And as everybody who knows me knows, I love food. In any Instagram post I do about food, I always tag it with, I love food. And I can still love food. And I can still be me. I can still love food. And I celebrate it, and I have joy about it. And I think that is another one of the differences about, like, having this new appreciation for food and life and whatever. It's like, I have joy about food. I have everything. I do everything. And people be damned about what they think or what they want. I do it, and I think that's the difference. I don't feel the guilt. I don't feel the whatever. And I make other people join in, and they seem to be joining in. I don't know.
And isn't that the point of life? I mean,
yeah, my life at least.
At the end of my life, I'm not going to be lying there. Hopefully I'll be lying there surrounded by family.
Not
but
saying, I wish I had paella. I don't want to do that.
I'm not going to be sitting there thinking, man, I shouldn't have had that coconut cream pie.
Yeah.
That was a mistake. No, I'm going to be saying, oh my God, I'm so glad. Tom Douglas, by the way, Seattle chef, makes the best coconut cream pie in the world.
All right, well, go for that when I come. I mean,
it's not cheap.
I don't want to have missed out. I don't want to have missed out on something because I was like, ooh, those 12 calories I could have saved. Like, that's so stupid.
Yeah. And getting back to the science, Dr. Cooper, you've told us so many times that our brain, that thing between our ears,
it knows it.
It cares about one thing, and that is feeling secure, right?
That's right.
So let's put a big bow on this, Dr. Cooper, in terms of being good to ourselves. The science of being good to our brain, what does that actually look like?
Well, just taking off with what Andrea was saying, that is so important, that joy of food, because on the flip side, there's that what's called the eating restraint index, which is when people are finding themselves eating and thinking they should not be eating what they're eating. They have linked that to alterations in your metabolic hormones that favor weight gain. So anytime you're consciously thinking or even subconsciously feeling dissatisfied with your body or the amount of food you're eating and thinking, I shouldn't be eating this, I should be exercising, the worse that gets, then the slower your metabolism gets. So embracing it the way Andrea is saying about food is joyful, and the experience of eating and the social experience of having meals with friends and family they have shown again and again the health benefits of that. And so I think that's something to really hold dear. And the other one would be maybe to value our physiologic intuition more. That's a term that I've used for decades, physiologic intuition. It's kind of like your own ability to know what's right for you and not to question that, like to really think of those cues that you get from your body when you feel good, when you're doing something and you feel good, and putting it together with the intuition of how you need to take care of yourself. And I think physiologic intuition is a really good thing to sharpen. And it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people, but I think that if you start thinking about your metabolism and you start maybe getting a metabolic workup and seeing what's going on, and then you start paying attention to those cues, you could develop an intuition that really kind of guides you and tells you whether you're on track or not.
Well, this has been super fun. I'm going to recap. And I really do hope that those of you listening embrace these resolutions because, we talked at the beginning, most of us don't do resolutions, but these are resolutions that are literally life-changing. So number one, if you think something is up with your metabolism, take action this year in 2025. Number two, stop trying to get a beach body, start focusing on health. Number three, commit to not dieting in 2025. Number four, get enough sleep. Number five, be good to yourself. Well, I'm looking forward to a healthy and happy, prosperous 2025. And I'm so glad that the three of us are friends and we get to talk all the time about really important stuff. So here's to a great year, you two. And another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.